Hello, friends of Private Universe. I gave a chat a couple of days ago on happiness, and I would like to share that with you. Enjoy. The great subject matter of happiness, which is a wonderful subject matter to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Last year we talked a little bit about anxiety, we talked about depression the time before, and so forth. So it's a little bit more upbeat today. Happiness is something that we all look for, of course, despite our culture, our gender, how much money we have, how tall or good looking we are, or how much education. What surprises me in my travels is what unites us all, and that's usually the pursuit of happiness. And what also I find in my travels, either overseas or just throughout Australia or through Sydney and so forth, where we talk to a lot of different people indeed, from different cultures, different religions. They might have different political ideals and so forth. In the end, we all want the same things. We want health. We would like for our children to be able to access schooling, for us to have water to drink and enough food to provide for our families. And from there upwards, we found out that happiness there's this various levels. The first level would be just the basics. And once we are capable of having those basics, of meeting in our lives the capacity to have on a daily basis that type of commitment to certain things that we need. Yeah. It's just like water, food, shelter, safety, and so forth. Then we look for other things. Our mind, our brain is made for us to, in one way, to want a little bit more once we reach a stage. We see that a lot, obviously, in financial issues, in financial settings where you would think that someone would have enough, but they want more, because maybe for us, if we're far away from how much money they may have, we would probably think, I'd be happy with that. The thing is that the brain, once it reaches a certain level, it tends to want more. We found that out, and we can pretty much say it's universal. And not only universal, it's also historical. Because when we read some of the writings of the past philosophers and writers and so forth, we find that the pursuit of happiness is based on being happy with what we have. And therefore, we find that unhappiness usually derives from not being able to get the things we want, even though we have the things we need. So it's funny how it works that way. And having access to that knowledge is very important. Whether we can do something about it, that's the next step. We all, in one way, say the same things sometimes to our friends or when we're at a dinner party, when we talk about things like, it's important to be happy with what we have and so forth. And we all know these things. We need to appreciate the things we already have, and we try to teach our children that, look, you're making a fuss because you didn't get enough potatoes, but there's kids in the world that don't have potatoes and so forth. We've all heard that when we're little, and we kind of like say it as well to our kids or grandchildren. And because it's true. One, it's true. But two, we're trying to teach the kids something very special, which is humility. You create humility and being humble by appreciating what you already have, giving thanks, for the things that we have. And sure, we should, why not, encourage them to have goals in life and to try to endeavor anyway to get better and better themselves as a human being. And bettering ourselves, that's a complex term. What is bettering ourselves, which we'll talk about as well today. In one way, that's very different for many people. So, but if we just say that bettering ourselves is, in one way, being able to be happy with what we have, it's kind of like a circular argument, isn't it? And being able to help others when we can, because that gives us a lot of satisfaction. For those of us who work in the health industry and the welfare industry. I've done a lot of welfare work prior to being a psychologist when I was a young man and so forth. It's very rewarding. A lot of the times we do it because we need to get paid, for sure. But when we do something, get paid, and on top of that help someone, it's a wonderful feeling. That's why we have philanthropists, which are people at the end of their lives usually that have a lot. And the only satisfaction that they have is giving to charity or helping others, because they've got everything material you can imagine. These are people with a lot of money. And so the satisfaction they get is something that's uncomparable to most other things, which are temporary. So we get other satisfactions for those people that like a coffee in the morning, and you have that first sip, or you might get satisfaction at having a great party in your house and wonderful music and so forth. But then it finishes, and then we're left with other things, with basically our own lives. And so if we don't have a philosophical foundation, then we can't continue that happiness, because happiness is a bit like water. When we try to squeeze it in our hands, it kind of like runs through our fingers. You can't capture it. It's in the present. So that's why a lot of people believe that the best thing to do in life is, sure, have those little satisfactions if they don't harm you much or harm others, for sure, but create opportunities at least to have things in your life that are more lasting, such as relationships and love and friendships and education and knowledge. These are things that even once you stop doing it, they still keep giving you things. And these are important in our lives. The other satisfactions, of course, we get they're quite nice to go through. You know what I mean? We all like certain things, but they usually don't last long. And sometimes we wait for them in a holiday and so forth, and they go, because we forget to enjoy it at the time, or we're already thinking that we're not enjoying it as much as we thought. So, and that's another problem we find with happiness, that we set our expectations too high with happiness because we don't understand the nature of happiness. So we're the only animals in the animal kingdom, in the world, living creature, that almost demands to be happy. And especially us in the Western world, we have plenty of opportunities to be happy. So, and it's almost like, you deserve it, I mean, type thing. And like that ad used to say, and in a way, sure, you might, and we all do in one way, deserve a certain amount of happiness, but unfortunately it just doesn't come that way. That's not the nature of happiness. The nature of happiness is created internally or sometimes externally, but we have to find it. It just doesn't come to us. It's a bit like motivation, when people say, I didn't do it because I wasn't motivated. And it's almost like this force from outside having swept us away to do things. And so it's very easy to say, I didn't do it because I wasn't motivated. This motivation didn't come rather than plan it. So I usually ask people to exchange to the word motivation for organization. So rather than say I didn't do it because I wasn't motivated, I didn't do it because I wasn't organized. And then suddenly you have more power, because hang on, I can do things or not do things depending on whether I organize myself to do them. And if they don't get done, there's only one person to point the finger to. So usually we find others to point the finger to, but when there isn't any, then we've got motivation to blame. So it's very important to, like motivation, with happiness it's similar. I talk to a lot of people in my private practice, and they do say they're not happy and so forth. And when you start talking to them and asking them a question, it always seems to be not their fault, a lot of the time anyway. And so one of the aspects in therapy is to try to give that person more control of their happiness, because that is the nature of happiness. It's individual, it's personal, it's usually very private. And on top of that, it doesn't really exist out there as a force. It's within us, and it needs to be created in little and simple tasks. We're going to have the big parties, we're going to have the wonderful holidays and so forth. But, there's 90 to 95% of our life is the 5s out of 10. Maybe what you're doing now is a 5 out of 10. If I'm a good enough speaker, of course, it might be a 3. And for maybe someone that hasn't heard about this subject matter before, it might be even higher. But 95% of our life is rated at a 5 out of 10. And that's, going to the shop, buying bread, getting to work, picking up the kids, watching a bit of TV. They're 5 out of 10. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. 5 out of 10, Then we get the 9s and sometimes even 10s. Oh, what a night, great night. I met someone, I fell in love, or you might be, what a wonderful 2 days. Usually it doesn't last longer than that. Usually there's things that happen in between that upset us. Someone cut us off, even if we're having a great time. That spoils it. Or someone didn't turn up on time, and so that spoils it too. But that's what I mean. Happiness is quite, in that sense, it's almost like water running through our fingers. We try to capture it. But they're the 9s, they're the 10s, and they do come, hopefully many times for all of you. And again, you need to create those times. You need to organize yourself, and say, it's Friday night, you know what, let's go out to have a pizza with your wife or with your friend or with your partner or on your own, whatever it may be. You need to be able to create those opportunities to meet people or to have a good time. But we become a little bit monotonous and a little bit, in one way, what would you say? We become satisfied with the things we do, and we create habits. Oh, it's Friday night. Usually, I'll just have a beer and watch the footy. You're right with that? Yeah, we'll do that. It's easier. It's too cold or too hot, or we'll save the money. That's fine. But then again, you're not changing anything in your life that you can get a different result with. And with relationships especially, we need to do that. You need to create those opportunities. I always say to people, regardless of your age, whether you're 22, 52, 82, and you have a partner, you have to create opportunities to spend time together outside of the domestic stuff, the everyday stuff. Because it's, pick up the kid. Did you pick up the kid? Did you get the bread? I didn't go. I told you to get the bread. It's all this stuff. The communication revolves around these 5s out of 10s, And so we get used to that. And so we need to create opportunity for the 9s and the 10s. And that usually happens when it's organized. It usually just won't happen when you get home from work and that all of a sudden, unless, you got a very big surprise and someone rings you up and tells you, you've just been promoted or you get surprised in if you're into financial gain. Oh yeah, my Ethereum went up and now I've made another $500 or something. That makes people happy. But again, it's only for a very, very short term. That's why they call it Bitcoin, because it only makes you happy a bit, and so it's one of those things, And in one way, it's with anything related to financial gain, it's very short lived. Even people that gamble and win a lot of money, you see them. I don't know if you ever spoke to a gambler, how nonchalantly they say, "Oh yeah, I won 10 grand yesterday." Right. That's because deep inside they know they've lost a lot more. That's number one. They know that to earn 10 grand gambling, and illegally anyway, you got to lose a lot because the system's made for losing, of course, or else there wouldn't be a system. People, it's a money making venture. So, and two, it's kind of disappointed because they kind of thought they'd be happier about it, but they're not. Yeah, maybe when the jackpot happened or something, that moment, and everyone around them, oh, good on you. But then once they walked out, the feeling's gone. Yeah, it's temporal. Those things are temporal. And that's very important to understand, I think, in the pursuit of happiness, because when we look at other people, sometimes we become a little envious, or because that's part of human nature, or jealous or whatever. And they're feelings that we all have, but we need to regulate because it's just a snapshot. It's like Instagram. Someone's there, here's my hubby with my salad, it's only a photo, Who knows what happened as soon as they clicked that button? Maybe the wind came and blew the salad away, or maybe he got upset because someone with a bill or whatever it might have been. So it's their little snapshot. So that's why it's very important to keep in mind that happiness is a very private thing. You can create. We have the ability, especially today with apps and so forth, to create, in one way, an image of happiness, sure, but it doesn't make you happy. Yeah, we can create images of happiness in our apps and so forth for others, But that's not happiness. Happiness, if you like, I think the best definitions I found, because I have studied and happiness in one way, especially with kids. I see a lot of adolescent, teenagers and so forth, and we try to look at what makes them happy, because when you're a teenager, I don't know if there's any ones in here, but the ones that aren't teenagers now, they definitely were, like me. And it's a tough time of our lives, because we're expected to do certain things. We have certain responsibilities now that we're 15 or whatever, but yet we're still too young to make other big decisions in our lives, and so we're caught in limbo or so forth. And so a lot of teenagers look like adults, but they don't have the experience to make sense of the world. And most of us don't ever make sense of the world. I mean, I've been reading Aristotle and Plato for decades, and I still haven't made sense. They didn't make sense of it, and they were far more intelligent than me, these philosophers and writers and so forth. So imagine like a 15-year-old. So they have a lot of uncertainty in the future. Am I going to finish study? Am I good enough? Am I good looking enough? Am I too skinny? Am I too fat? Am I too tall? Am I too white? Am I too dumb? Am I too? So they've got all these things, and we all went through that. Am I ever going to get married? What am I going to do when I leave my home? All these uncertainties. Then with experience, of course, we work these things out. When you're 6, it's a different world. Your mum and your dad are your heroes, and they live forever and so forth. And there's no abstract terms that you have to deal with, like love and God and infinity and eternity and death and all these things. Then as an adolescent, on top of all the physiological changes, we have also the philosophical changes, which we can't get our head around. And usually as adults is difficult, like all those terms, a few that I just mentioned, but there's more. But we kind of like come to terms with them, whether it's love or death or whatever, and because we make sense of it in our own way, or sometimes through religion, or sometimes through philosophy, or sometimes we might not even make sense of it, but we still live with it because we understand it's part of life. But for a teenager, it's quite a scary moment. So it's very important to give them, in one way, hope, which is true, that life's going to get better, 100% usually, because teenage life is the hardest part. But secondly, it's important to give them a good definition of happiness, or else they're setting themselves up for failure, because they're like little adults. Like I talk to adults that think this way too, that they get upset because they're not happy, rather than understanding that happiness isn't something that stays around. You've got to continue, you have to create it constantly you've got to create the opportunities for happiness in our lives. So it's nothing that comes from nothing, and it doesn't come from outside. It usually comes from within, when we have a certain satisfaction, if you like, in life. And so if they've got all those basics, some kids don't. I've spoken to a lot of teenage kids that they have a really rough start in life. They have parents that should never have been parents. They have issues in their life that they should not be going through. And so that's quite tragic in one way, but that exists everywhere in the world. And so first things first, we need to give them the basics, which is security, safety, and so forth, and then start with the other things. But you find that these type of children also, if they get through that part, they might do all right because they're quite resilient and so forth. And with children, I think we need to keep it simple. We've got to explain to them that, look, you're not alone in this life. We're all roughly pursuing the same things, all of us. We're all very different, looking and thinking and talking, and sometimes we dress different, but most people want the same things. There are the odd person. In psychology, we call them psychopaths or sociopaths. So it's a clinical issue. They want other things, They get satisfaction, unfortunately, out of things that aren't good for anyone else, So, but for most of us, we get little satisfactions out of life that usually surprise us. For example, you might decide to to go out one day on your own and suddenly with no expectations and then you might have a great conversation with someone and leave and never maybe see this person again, but come out of that conversation feeling that you've just added to your life. And so the best definition in especially for tasks of happiness is try to work out almost mathematically if you can. There's things that add to our lives and things that subtract. And that's with everything, whether it's gambling or stock, whether it's in the stock market or it's on sport or whatever it may be, whether it's alcohol or whether it's smoking or whatever it may be, dancing, even good things like reading. Too much reading is bad for you. Look, you end up with glasses and so forth. And not only because it's physiologically bad for your posture and all this, because it's bad because you're focusing too much on one thing. Yeah, that's why you find a lot of geniuses, for example, that are great painters or great actors or even great sports people or whatever that may be, great writers. A lot of them had tragic lives because they were extremely good at one thing and they were very poor at others. So what happened is that the focus remains on one thing. So the best definition, I think Aristotle has it, from 2,500 years ago, that happiness is moderation, and that means doing a certain amount of things in our lives for a certain amount of time, but being also, in one way, adventurous with many things. So it's good to read philosophy, it's good to dance, it's good to do some sport, and it's good to sleep, it's good to do many things, but too much of any of those ones that I just used, those examples, is bad for us. And too little is bad for us. So that's why there's a point. There's a point where things give, and that's usually for anything, unless they're really bad things, of course. There are drugs that you should never actually get close to, of course. But for most things, they do add to our lives in a certain way. They do add to our life, and that's why you find people that are quite extreme in their thinking. That don't do this or don't do that. Sometimes they suffer as much as someone that does a lot of it too, because they're kind of like, in a way, committed and addicted, if you like, to not doing these things, either not eating this or not doing that or not drinking that. So if it doesn't mean we have to do things we dislike, but if we like them and we do them in moderation, we find that people that do those type of things are far happier than people that go to an extreme. So a good thing for you guys is, for yourselves, and if you're talking to somebody young, is to ask, what are the things you do? Tell me about your day. What happens on Monday when you wake up? And you ask them, what do you do, and ask yourself that. Start with yourself. What do I do? Actually write it down even if you can. Like Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor from 2,000 years ago, we've got a wonderful book from him called Meditations. And you guys, if you have an opportunity and you want to get into the philosophy of happiness, that's the best book to start with. It's simple to read. It's still, if you like, very, very appropriate and still stands the test of time. It was written 2,000 years ago, literally. So Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, and he was named the last of the good emperors. There were 5 good emperors, mainly because they gave more to the people rather than take, and he was the last. And his son took over, and he pretty much undid everything that Marcus Aurelius had done. I mean, if you ever watch the movie Gladiator, that's historically correct. The young emperor, was Marcus Aurelius' son, and Marcus Aurelius had died, and that's why the main character says, "I only take orders from your father," type thing. So, and that's relatively historically correct. So we know that a lot about his life because he wrote a journal, and never to be published. He never wanted to publish it, but we've kept it. It survived 2,000 years, and you can look at it, and you can buy it for about $2 on anywhere. Like if you like ebooks, but probably for $10 on a proper book. It's called Meditations, and it's a wonderful start to the philosophy of happiness, because he talks and he reminds himself of the things that he already has and appreciate. For example, he reminds himself to always tuck his children in at night because he doesn't know whether he might see them again. During those times, of course, and being the emperor, you just don't know. There were wars, but even today, it's the same. Life is very fragile, as you know. If you've ever lost someone, it doesn't take long, and it's good not to be too pessimistic, but realistic, to say, I'm going to make sure I stick to the things that are important to me. What would I regret, in a year's time if I haven't done this and that? So those little things, and he goes through appreciating the people that were good to him in his life and who have made him who he is, and to always to remind himself that despite being the emperor, he doesn't want luxuries and so forth, because he realized they don't really make him happy, and so and that's proven. That's proven. So after we get our basics, if you get that book, that's wonderful. It's called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Aurelius. That's my first recommendation, because philosophy, sometimes people panic, philosophy. It sounds like something that I'll probably get bored with or find it hard to follow, but there's practical philosophical books like that one, which are wonderful. And a lot of the things you might not decide that is for you, but you'll be able to pick and choose, I suppose, like we all do in most books. What works for us, and you'll be very surprised how there hasn't been much change with regards to human nature. When you really think about it, 2,000 years is a relatively long time, and yet we're still concentrating and worried and hoping for very, very similar things. That was part 1 of my chat on happiness, and I'll release part 2 very, very soon, So I hope you enjoyed that, and remember, most importantly, that existence, friends of Private Universe, is marvelous.